All right. Hello, everyone. I think it's about time to kick things off. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to today's webinar for SSE Alumni on the digitalization of expertise, hosted by the Stockholm School of Economics. My name is Sebastian Krakowski, and I have the honor of moderating this session today. Now, as you may hear, I unfortunately have a cold and a sore throat, so that's why I'm quarantining here. But I'm still very, very happy to be here, and I just apologize in advance for any strange noises that I make. Now, I'm a postdoc researcher at SSE, and I'm also an alumnus from the bachelor program started in 2009 and the master's program, which I started in 2012, where I studied economics and management. And I recently obtained my PhD at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. And there I focused, the focus of my dissertation was actually on the topic of digitalization and organizational behavior, specifically looking at technologies like artificial intelligence and its effect on organizational strategy and complex decision making. So that there's quite a bit of overlap with today's topic. So I'm very, very glad and happy to be here to moderate and listen in. Of course, today's session will focus on how professional service firms strategize to adopt digitalization, as well as how the role of the human expert changes in response to this development. Now, we hope that you are all receiving and reading the SSE Alumni newsletter, and that you have noticed the offering of webinars and articles that are available to you. We encourage you, of course, to reach out to SSE's alumni office as well. If you have any ideas or feedback on things that you would like to see or things you would not like to see in the future, so please feel free to reach out and share your thoughts and input. Now, before we get started with the formal part of the program, and I proceed to introduce our speakers, I would briefly like to mention some housekeeping points. So due to the number of participants, we have muted everyone. Apologies for that. However, we would like to encourage you to actively participate by adding your questions and thoughts in the chat. So please direct them to Anna. And any and all thoughts and questions are welcome, and we will pick them up in the Q&A session towards the end of the program of the hour we have here together. And also, please turn on your video if you feel comfortable doing that. It's nice to be able to see one another. It makes it, of course, more interactive as well. And also, if you wouldn't mind to update your name in Zoom. And the year you started at SSE, that's also nice to be able to see where everyone's background and where everyone is at. And finally, we will be recording this webinar to make it available for watching later as well, just for your information. Now, having taken care of that, it's time to start the portion we've all been waiting for. Today's topic, which, as I mentioned, I am profoundly interested in myself, is about how professional service firms have, are changing, how things are changing among these firms in response to digitalization. Traditionally, they've been depicted as highly reliant on their employees' expertise and knowledge base, of course, being fundamental in professional services. But as more and more of these expert tasks that were previously exclusively the domain of human experts can be performed by robots and AI, and some, at least in part, but sometimes even entirely automated. We as researchers, as well as the firms themselves and the practitioners, are eager to find out things like how are professional services responding to the threat of digital disruption, and what new opportunities are arising. How can these technologies be adopted in service work, in the service sector, and what kind of expertise and new roles and employees are needed to leverage this development in a meaningful and productive way and competitive way. To discuss this, we're fortunate to be joined by two speakers with a keen knowledge of this topic who will share their insights and perspectives on this. So it is my pleasure to introduce Frida Pemer, docent and associate professor at the Department of Management and Organization, as well as the House of Innovation at SSE, and Mattias Johansson, SSE Alum and Audit Partner at KPMG Sweden. So a warm welcome to you. Now, I would like to ask both of you very briefly before we proceed to tell us about yourself, specifically what you do and what your relationship is to the topic we're here to discuss. So please, Frida, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I'm really excited to be here and to meet all of you, and I'm really happy to be here with Mattias, of course. So yes, my research interest is very much about this, and I'm leading an international research project called Digitalization of Expertise. So this is really my favorite theme. This is what I'm interested in, and this is also what I teach, very much about transformation, digital transformation, but from an organizational perspective and leadership perspective. How do we make this happen? So that's really a key interest from my side, and I'm going to hand over to you, Mattias.
Yeah, and I've been I have been in KPMG for 23 years in Sweden and the US, and I have, this is like a chance to reflect back on the first years in the early 90s when still working like with a paper and a pen towards where we are today, where we use use electronical and technical tools in such a large extent, and also look into the future where I think we are going, or our competitors are going, and other professional service firms are going. This is really high on the agenda for us and for everyone else that wants to serve clients.
Thank you very much. And again, a very warm welcome. Thank you for being here. Of course, it's a very timely topic as well. There's debate now ongoing, considering the pandemic. Digitalization has enabled us to do this from a distance as well. So I'm very much looking forward to our discussion. But without further ado, I want to welcome Frida to present some of your research. The digital floor is yours, so to speak.
Great, thank you so much. And now I'm just going to have a small technical question for you, Chen. So I'm going to move around to you. Sorry. Do I use a computer? Yes, thank you. I can move you over there. Okay, so that is going to be interesting. Okay, right. So apologies for that. Right, I'm going to show this a short presentation. There are some animations in it, and that's why I needed to ask Yushan, but she's going to help me out with that. Right, so let's start right away. We can go for the next slide, please. Sometimes it's a bit slow. That's part of the game. Yes, exactly. So just to start off in a very nice way, we can take the next at once. Right. So I'm also a former student from here, and at least when I was a student here back in the days, in the heydays, as I would like to say, but in the Stone Age, as my students think, unfortunately. Anyway, there was this room down in the basement called Börsrummet. Perhaps you remember it. Perhaps it existed. And there were these people sitting there days and nights, and they were trading stocks, buying and selling shares. Right, that room doesn't exist anymore, as far as I know. And we also all know what happened in Wall Street. There used to be a lot of people trading shares, trading stocks, and doing lots of work there. Today we have robots, we have automated a large part of the trading, we have artificial intelligence working with this. We have even seen examples of the AIs forming cartels and so on. So lots of things have happened in that section. Now the question is, what's going to happen then with the human expert? Because as Sebastian mentioned in the beginning, this is something that is changing, and we don't really know exactly what the future of the human expert is going to look like. But let's move to the next slide, please. I can take both of them. Yes, perfect. So what we do know is that there are lots of articles and books being written about this currently, and there's a lot of business press and the kind of books you pick up at the airport. And what you can see there are predictions of the future of the professional service industry. And the two most common predictions, from my experience at least, and this is really my experience, is the following. The first one is to say that the professional service industry is going to be disrupted by digitalization. So it's really a gloomy future. The doomsday is approaching, basically. And then we also know that, or they say at least, they're in the predictions, that the human value, the human expertise is going to be devaluated. So these two arguments are frequently seen and heard in media and in business press and also in academic articles, but as predictions. So there's still a lack of empirical studies, meaning that we actually don't know whether these predictions are going to hold true. Is this really the future, or is something else happening that might take the industry in a different direction? And my idea, and what I would like to discuss here with you today, is one of the studies I've been performing in this research project that perhaps can help nuance this picture, because personally, I'm not convinced of these predictions. I think a lot of things are happening in the different professional service industries that are going to change the way the future is going to play out, basically, for these firms. So yes, these are predictions, but I'm not really convinced. Let's see what you say afterwards. So next slide, please. Right, so before we move on, I would just like to say a few words about the concept of disruption. And I think it's important that we talk about it because this is something that we hear over and over again, especially in relation to digitalization. And normally when we talk about disruption, we mean market disruption. And you're all familiar with this concept, I think. There's been lots and lots of books and texts about it. And in a market disruption, the classic idea is that you look outside your company, you look at the market. There might be new technologies coming in, and they might enable new companies to enter the market and upset the dynamics and change everything. And they might enjoy the attacker's advantage because they have new technologies, new services, new business models, etc. And the incumbent firms find it difficult to keep up and to adapt. And here we have the classic theoretical concept of creative destruction, going back to Schumpeter, really pointing at the idea that disruption is a two-faced phenomenon. So you have the bright side, the creative side, the creation of new services and products and companies, but also the destructive side, destructing the existing dynamics, and also perhaps the chances for the incumbents. Now, what I think is even more important that we talk about, and that we talk about a little bit too little, I think, has to do with the competences and the competence disruption. And this is particularly important for professional service firms, of course, I mean, since the very big competitive advantage lies in the knowledge base of these firms. So here, the story might be a little bit different. So we have to look inside our companies. We look at our own knowledge base and we try to understand, okay, is this still valid? Is it still relevant? Are parts of it becoming obsolete and outdated? And so on. And especially with new technologies like digitalization, we need to sort of rethink our knowledge base. And here we can use the concept of creative accumulation as a key to success, I would say. So you can compare it with the Schumpeterian creative destruction, but then here the idea is that you should look at your accumulated knowledge base, not just say that everything is outdated and try to recruit a new group of people, or just continue as you always have done, but look at your accumulated knowledge base and then in a creative manner, try to complement it and incorporate new types of skills that might be totally different from what you've been doing. And if you can manage to pull this off, then you might actually enjoy a sort of incumbent's advantage, because as a large company, you might already have a big knowledge base, you have your brand, you have a good market position and all that, and can sort of draw on that, but you still have to creatively integrate new types of knowledge. Right, lots of talking, lots of theories. Okay, next slide, please. Right, so perhaps you've seen quotes like this. There are lots of statements, lots of reports being written, and the numbers may vary a little bit, but the core idea of these reports is that most of us will have to upskill or even reskill in a rather near future. And it's not just for people with standardized low-wage jobs, it's also for more skilled experts. We have to upskill and reskill. So next slide, please. And here what we can see, what is usually quite successful, is to focus not just on jobs and occupations, because that's a bit too blunt if you want to understand how to cope with this, but to really focus on the task level. to try to unbundle the jobs, try to unbundle the roles that we have. And you, for instance, what kind of tasks do you do when you go to work? Perhaps you have 10 different tasks. Well, maybe 1 or 2 of them could be performed by technology, and you could spend more time on the other 8. I don't know, but that's sort of the way of going forward here. Next slide, please. Right. So exactly. So then what I was interested in was to understand, okay, so what's happening really in the professional service industry? So next slide, please. Next. Thank you. So I've been looking at Swedish companies, or companies based in Sweden, at least, the Swedish branches, in 4 different industries. And we started doing interviews. This is still a very explorative study. We started conducting interviews a few years ago, but we are still following up and conducting new interviews. And I would just like to share one of the results that we got from this study. So next slide, please. Thank you. So just to very briefly indicate how these different types of companies are organized or organizing and strategizing around these ideas of competences and digitalization, we could see 2 different, two different themes, basically. One was their perception of digitalization. Is this perceived as a disruptive force or not? And we could see quite big differences here. In some companies, within especially the PR communication consulting and also engineering consulting, digitalization is not seen as a disruptive force. It's business as usual, but for very different reasons. And I'm going to come back to that. On the other axis, we have 2 different strategies for how to incorporate the new types of skills and knowledge that is needed to keep up with digitalization. And on the one hand here, we have the separation strategy, which basically means that you might want to include more digital skills in your organization, but you keep it in a very separate manner. Whereas on the other hand, you could also have the integration strategy. And this means that you try to integrate it as much as possible. And you're going to get the chance to comment on this in a minute, but, but at least just to say a few words about each of these industries, I think it's really interesting to see the PR communication consultants. Of course, they don't see it as very disruptive, because a lot of their work is based on understanding other humans and the human interaction, the human reactions, the human emotions. And so far, technology is not that good. At least not as good as humans, at least not so far. But interestingly here, of course, they are working a little bit with digitalization, working with social media, etc., but still keeping the digital skills as something that is very, very separate from their core skills. So when they wanted to have more digital skills for something, they either sourced it from external experts or acquired a small company, but then treated it as a different special entity. So there was no like integration of the 2 in the firms. If we look at the engineering consultants, on the other hand, they didn't see it as very disruptive, because they said, well, this is what we do, right? Self-driving cars, that has been something we've been working on for like 20 years, because we use that in the big mines, for instance, in the mining industry. So this is not problematic for us, but they were still very, very curious in how to use these new technologies for their own internal work in organizations. But then again, it's more about upskilling the already existing skills in digital tools and technologies. Okay, so these are the sort of non-disruptive perceptions of digitalization. If we move upwards to the legal services industry, we can see that in the larger law firms in Sweden, there is this perception that yes, digitalization is probably going to disrupt the industry. One reason for that is that we have quite a strong legal tech industry in Sweden, and it's even stronger in the UK and the US, etc. And this is driving changes forward. And we can see lots of examples of how these firms are investing quite heavily in, could be new types of platforms and systems, lots of legal tech tools that you can apply to work with due diligence, to work with contracts, templates, etc. So really working quite a lot with this to try to develop, especially the internal processes, to become more effective and efficient. However, when they were recruiting new people, these people tend to have like an expert role within digital technologies, whereas the legal experts still work with their legal expertise. So that, again, this is sort of separated. But then we have auditing, last but not least. And I think this is a very, very interesting example. And I'm so happy that Mattias is here today to comment on this also, because what we've found so far is that in the auditing industry, there is a big awareness that digitalization could potentially be disruptive because there are so many technologies that could be applied to improve the different ways of performing analysis, but also to develop new types of services, for instance, using predictive and prescriptive analysis, looking forward into the future. So a strong awareness about this, but also a lot of things that are happening. And what we've seen is that within the auditing industry, there are many attempts being made on really integrating these new skills into the existing knowledge base. So it's not only having a team of digital experts and then you have auditors, but rather trying to increase the general knowledge about digitalization among all the auditors, and also increasing the knowledge about auditing among the digital experts, and even creating new types of roles and career paths that can help working with this sort of translation between digitalization and auditing. So super exciting, I think it is a very, very interesting example. And in my mind, going back to what we saw before, this is also a prime example of how you can actually do the creative accumulation in reality. So it's not just a theoretical concept, it can actually be used. So I'm going to round up with the very last slide, please. Yes, thank you. We can take all of them. Yes, and there you go. So what could be the potential consequences of these developments? Well, I said in the beginning that there are lots of predictions, and okay, here are mine. So I'm no better than anyone else. But anyway, I think we're going to see a lot of new roles being developed in different types of professional service firms. We're going to see new types of career paths, and that in turn is going to lead to new organizational forms. I don't think the pyramid structure is going to disappear, but it might take a little bit different shape, perhaps. There will also be different kinds of business models and pricing mechanisms and so on. We can see a lot of attempts being made of replacing the billable hour with, for instance, subscriptions and fixed prices and other types of pricing mechanisms. New sources and new sourcing expertise, we can see again a lot of attempts being made to develop new types of new ways of finding and getting access to these kind of experts that you need and that everyone else is looking for as well. So it's really a hard competition to get these people. But new ways are being developed. And this is something that we happened to discuss right before this webinar, but I actually think that for the new entrants, it might be a good market because it's lots of opportunities. For the larger incumbents, it might also be a good opportunity because you have the resources and the know-how to sort of continuously transform and invest in these things. It might be more difficult for the medium-sized companies if they are fast enough to keep up and don't have enough resources to invest. And then lastly, this is more anecdotal, but I have heard a lot of people saying that what should we do when the big FAANG companies come into the market? What do we do the day Google decides to open Google Law or Amazon starts doing auditing? How can we compete with these data-driven companies? Okay, a lot of talking from my side. Yeah. I'm going to stop there. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Frida. I found that really interesting perspectives, and also at the end there, the trends I find really thought-provoking. So thank you very much for that. We're now gonna get started with our panel discussion, but just to get the discussion started, Mattias, would you care to share some of your thoughts, reflections in general, and also perhaps in relation to what Frida just talked about?
Yeah, if I just start with connecting back to the discussion about where the size matters. So I would think that one thing that really come into the expertise of the consulting companies is an increased need for capital, for investments. It used to be maybe that you would use the revenue from your operation to train and reward your employees, and then you would work with some kind of reward system to keep as many as possible, because that was basically the assets you were building up, the human capital asset. And that's not the case anymore. You would probably need to invest in software, in databases, in and other kinds of intangible assets. It's not only the human resource that matters now if you want to be an advisory firm with any kind of impact. And just to connect back to what you say, I think it's excellent if you like a boutique company, maybe someone that works with, like if I compare to KPMG, someone works with like deal advisory, a small corporate finance firm that has maybe are really good at number crunching or have a great database with M&A targets. They can be very competitive. But other than that, it's going to be kind of hard to keep up with for like a big four company that has a global presence, has the infrastructure that works all over the world, and that can support with so many different needs a client would need. So I think that the need for capital is increasing in our kind of business. And I would think, I haven't really read into it, but I'm really interested if we take something else, we take HiQ, listed advisory company that's Triton is trying to buy. And obviously they see something that a private equity firm could contribute to a knowledge company here, and it probably not helping the consultants at HiQ doing the work better. So it must be something else. I think they probably did have the same view that they're going to need more capital. So that's one thing I really want to connect back with.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. One aspect I would like to pick up on right away is the sector specific aspects, because I found it really interesting, Frida, how you went into you differentiated among sectors. Often it's just digitalization is just lumped together as a general disruption in the marketplace and everyone has to adapt, but you actually go into the specifics and talk about how different sectors are affected differently. So I was just wondering, Mattias, if you have some thoughts on that, maybe even the specific industries that Frida talked about, law, auditing, of course, but also others perhaps.
I think there's many factors that are important. I think it was interesting when you compared it to PR persons that actually work with human being, and human being computer is not as good with that as other human beings are. And if I compare to like auditing and in a way tax as well, law as well, where there is more, if I think audit or any kind of number crunching, where you need to be able to work with a lot of transactions, a lot of data, that's an area where computers can help us a lot. And I think in a way, I would say, my view of law, excuse me, any lawyers that out there listening to, but in a way, I think a lot of like law firms, a lot of the work they do are kind of repetitive, and they spend a lot of time on, signing contracts, copying, proofreading, stuff like that. So there's a lot of manual hours that goes into a law firm as well. But the difference maybe between a law firm and audit firm, that's what we came under price pressure earlier than law firms did. If I compare how a law firm works with an audit firm, to simplify a little bit like 10 years behind us, because we were put under pressure in terms of how the customers came to us and asked us to reduce price earlier than the law firms did. So that has also made us more sensitive, and it's been more urgent for us to look for efficiencies, where law firms has been able to maybe keep up doing things the old way because they were better at charging. And now it's not as easy. You need to look for efficiencies. So then you need to look for computer aid.
Right. It's so many interesting threads to pick up on. Just to come back to the capital aspect, because in very general terms, at least in theoretical terms, disruption is a challenge to incumbent large companies. But on the other hand, they're the ones who have the capital, oftentimes, that is considered necessary, as you say, to invest in these technologies. So I see a bit of a contradiction there, that on the one hand, some incumbents are favored. For example, Amazon have done quite well in this crisis, just to name the most prominent example. But on the other hand, there are startups that are kind of leveraging digitalization and scale as well, and are managing to scale very quickly and build up a big market very quickly. So do you have any reflections on this?
Yeah, if I look at, one thing I talk about, just looking at like small players, this is also just like anecdotal. I'm not a researcher, so I just base it on my personal experience. Is that as an audit partner, just being on LinkedIn, I get not every week, but maybe every month, some kind of tech guy in Amsterdam or Belgium or wherever is saying, we have this tool that's probably going to help you in the audit. Do you want to see? So there's a lot of, we would call it like suppliers, that's really, that takes, that understood that there's going to be even more need for analytical tools, for artificial intelligence solutions, for number crunching, and a lot of entrepreneurship out there. And we as a big, we have the clients and we have the global presence. So we are the customers for them. So it's not that maybe they have these great analytical tools for predicting future earnings, how you, if you would be able to do that based on historical data. It's not that they would maybe not be able to make profit out of it by themselves, but they would really like to inject it into and connect to a larger professional service firm, and we can work with this together and serve our clients in a more profitable way together.
Right.
Thank
you.
I think it's I think that's really interesting. But I mean, we speak a lot about all these new tech firms and these small new entrants. I mean, it's legal tech, it's fintech, break tech, ed tech, medtech, whatever. And I think this is also another leg in this research project about, okay, what kind of role do these new actors take in the market? And as you say, they might not be competitors, they might be more like complements, or even acquired by or being supplied to these larger firms. I think that's very interesting how the ecosystem is changing also in the markets, and how you can make use of that in a smart way.
Absolutely, and there, of course, there are. I mean, if you talk about, let's say, compliance, we do a lot of compliance work, of course. And then if you have some kind of software that's help a company, it might not be maybe a financial company, might be something else. We get a compliance software, and then you would be able to approach big, large clients, get your foot in, and then you get the client on their own. That's one way to do it, but it's kind of hard to get the foot into the door. If they would be able to partner up with us or another global firm outside Big Four or so, we can open that door for them. So it's a sort of, we could be sort of a platform to go to market. And I think there are a lot of companies out there who would like to partner up with us or with, I mean, there are other companies outside the Big Four as well, company like Accenture or whatever, but the really big ones would probably be a good partner for these people that develop state-of-the-art tools.
Thank you very much. While we're on the topic of how this disruption is perceived, I would just be curious to hear, Frida, the companies you talked to that perceived this as a real disruption, what was the sentiment like? Was it, were they stressed, scared? Did they see opportunities as well as threats? Was there a kind of a fear of missing out? Maybe there's, I mean, of course, there's a lot of hype surrounding the technologies that are linked to disruption. So what are your impressions and experiences?
Yeah, that's a good question. And before I answer that, I would just like to say that when we started this study, we were not sure at all that it was going to be these very strong industry dynamics. We really kept an open mind and said perhaps we're going to see other differences, smaller versus larger professional service firms, or those being perhaps Swedish from the origin or international from the origin or whatever. But we found these extremely strong industry dynamics, which I thought was quite interesting in itself. But to answer your question, yes, I think I wouldn't call it a fear, but rather like a realization that, okay, we need to do something. And a lot of the people I've been interviewing have said, oh, if we don't have the option not to do this. It's like we just have to, or else we are going to become dinosaurs or extinct. That kind of metaphor has been used quite often. But I wouldn't say there's a fear, and I think it's more like a realization. Okay, we have to do this. Okay, so then let's do this in a smart manner. Yeah. Thank you.
And just to follow up, coming back to the other axis in your diagram, when it comes to integration and separation, I anecdotally, of course, I've heard that companies that separate to much are doomed to fail in their IT, specifically AI and digital initiatives. Is that too simplistic in your view? Or is there something to that?
Well, it depends what you base it on, of course. But I would say there is absolutely some truth in it. I do believe it's really important to try to integrate as much as possible to at least make sure that everyone, I mean, really everyone in the company has a basic understanding for digitalization. Not everyone has to be able to program or you know, understand it, but you should raise the lowest level in the organization. And here I think there are many good examples in particularly the auditing industry, like internal training, gamification, I mean, all sorts of initiatives being taken that really, and also to make sure that these initiatives are supported by like the reward systems, performance measurement and so on. Because if I go back to the other types of industries that we researched, we could see that in some companies there were initiatives and there were appointed digital experts, but they were not supported by any sort of reward systems, and all the work that they did didn't count, which meant that they could spend hours and hours helping their colleagues with pitches and all that, providing lots of expertise. But they worked in-house, so they didn't get any bonus, but their colleagues got the bonus. I mean, so, and there you have, these people, they were not very happy.
Yeah, that's interesting. We can also like just draw on a little way how it works in KPMG. We talked about investments, and it's expensive to develop tools. The way we work and the way basically all the other global audit firm works is that you have a local partnership. Could be just Sweden, or it could be Nordic or European, whatever. But it's something local. There's no true global partnership within our industry anyway. And if you want to invest, you need to share those costs. And then you would need to, and as it works in KPMG, for instance, that we have the Norwegians are great at development. And instead of us in Sweden, we do some stuff, but we also draw on their work. And then we need to agree on what's the fee. And one thing I was visiting, we have a development center in Amsterdam. I went there and they were really, when they set up something from New Year's 2 years ago because the old one didn't work, and what they were really emphasizing was that they would really try to measure the benefit. So they could either sit down and say that we want to develop a tool here, that because they think it's going to be useful, and that's like maybe 30% of the work. The rest of it would be that someone said, I have a problem, and then they would resolve it for them. And then it was really important, if you want a problem to be resolved, you need to tell them, okay, I think if you can help me, you can save me 100 man hours. And then if you say 100, okay, then we do it. And then you would afterwards say, did it save 100 or did it say 50 or 500? And then they keep measuring that and reporting it back. And that's a way to keep management interested, because they are not a profit center. They don't have any customers, but they serve the people that meet the customers. And by measuring the impact they have been able to demonstrate how important they are, how much, because in the end, we are partner driven, we like to earn money, how much money they save. And there's like no debate that how much value is being created. And it's also interesting just to have like a hurdle. We need to have this much cost saving to start working, because otherwise we need to prioritize something else. Because there's always 100 ideas you can work with. So you need to choose. So I think that was very inspiring to look at that.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Now, on the topic of measurement and evaluation, oftentimes that can be a challenge, I would assume, because at the basic level here, we're talking about data, using data in a meaningful way, in innovative ways, to create value and to compete, to create a competitive advantage. But that can be hard if you don't know the value of the data. Let's say if you share data or acquire data, oftentimes, of course, with technologies like AI, for example, or any data-driven approach, it's very limited by the quality of data and secondarily the scale of the data you have at your disposal. So in your experience, is it hard for firms to really gauge the potential business value associated with these technologies, and how do they kind of tackle this challenge? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, but it's really key. If I as an audit partner, we need just to start off with that we have to us, integrity is really important, and that what kind of the data that we obtain from the audits is like sort of, we can't really distribute that in any way. We need to keep that. But in all kinds of advisory work we do, in other kinds of work we do, and also by is going to public, using public data, that's really growing. We have, in Sweden, we have a center in Gothenburg where we invite Swedish companies to come down, and we help by drawing on the databases. Independent of what industry you work in, we can help them with simulations and competitor analysis, and the way we've been able to gather and package and present that data has been is really important for our customers. So it's a clear-cut advantage that we sit on this. I wouldn't say gold mine, but like all this information. So it's increasingly important. Absolutely. And that's also, we talk about like, you know, scale. It's easier for us with 200. I think with 225,000 employees worldwide, compared to if you're 20 guys, to connect that. But again, it's also like very complicated of you know, actually being able to draw value out of it. So it's
of course. Thank you very much. It's very enlightening. I would like to come back to the issue of competency requirements. In a way, you could say that it's a contradiction, because these technologies can automate a lot of, as you said, Mattias, the recurring, regular kind of rule-based tasks that are often quite boring, to be frank. And then ideally, one could say that enables us to focus on relationship building, which of course in auditing is important, and in any other professional services firm, especially, I would say that relationships and the human dimension matters a lot. So why is this so disruptive? Frida, do you have a good answer to that question, that vaguely phrased question?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I think it has to do with, on one hand, yes, you can look internally at the professional service firms, but you also have to look at the context and the clients. What are they looking for? What are they, we discussed this before, what are they prepared to pay for? And especially what I've seen among the interviews I conducted, many of the partners would say that, well, in my generation and the generations below me, people understand the value of having a trusted advisor. But I can see with the digital natives that are starting in the firm, their friends, they don't really see the point. Why should I pay this much? I can just Google and find someone else, like a tech firm that can do this much cheaper. And they don't really understand the value, the extra value that comes with the personal relationship and the bigger picture and all the experience and all that. So I think that would also be something that plays into it.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I mean, in old days it would probably I'm a male SSE student above average height. I mean, everyone would trust me. Why do I need to know anything? Basically, like a very easy career path. But it's really old-fashioned now. It's looking ahead. I think like experience will always be important. But if you don't have the number to back you, it doesn't matter, because it's like it's all, you have to have the fact to support your views, and not just experience from this is something similar I've seen once.
Right.
The other thing I would say, like if I just look at the way it disrupts our, and I think a lot of professional service companies, including law firms, is probably, I think the dog years are probably shorter and different. I was trying to, like in my head when you talked about that, okay, what did it used to be like? I think it used to be, you spend a couple of years with gathering information. Basically, you would stand by a copy machine, or you would type numbers that you get on a paper. You need to type it into a computer, stuff like that. I think that's a little bit behind us. We don't have that like information gathering process, not anymore. And the next step in a career, whether it be in a law firm or an audit firm or a deal, what would be probably be doing like analysis. Now you go more straight into this. You start with analytics earlier, And the next thing would be maybe like judgment calls and relationship building and that. And I think you would probably arrive at that phase earlier if you start a career within a service company as compared to when it was in the 90s when we were students.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's going to make it. But then I also look at, we talk about efficiencies, we talk about cutting off work that we don't need anymore. And then I look into my office where we are like, I think we're in Stockholm, we probably like 250 people doing audit work. And we were 250 people 5-6 years ago where we weren't as digitalized as we are right now. So either we are, so I hope that, I need to go back and check, but I hope the efficiencies that we actually measure is being, that we actually prepare more value, create more value and being more relevant by doing better analysis and having more time to spend on relationships and things that actually matter more to our clients. So we have a lot more people doing, the same amount of people doing basically the same thing more efficiently. So I hope our customers experience that we actually do, our clients, that we do it better.
And
Thank
just
you.
add that because I think it's so interesting, and I think that's really the key, right? To constantly try to remain relevant and be even more relevant, and that means that you have to change a little bit what you're doing and to move into different directions and skip a few things and automate them or whatever you do. I think that's really interesting. And I also think, just as a small note, I think it's so interesting comparing the students here at SSE today with when we went here, because then at that time, I think everyone was prepared to do the dog years. I mean, we knew that that's what's going to take, right? You need to spend this time. If you talk to students today, I'm not sure they would be very interested in dog years. Why would I spend time on doing that? I want to contribute to the world and bring value and not cooking coffee or copying paper or anything like that. So it's
Thank
also
you.
mind shift.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, there's a lot of talk about reskilling and upskilling in response to digitalization. So would you say that maybe each and every one of us has a responsibility to keep up with this technological development? Do all firms have kind of requirement to keep to provide that education, that continuous lifelong education to their employees? Is that a way forward, or does the government play a role there, or is it rather on the individual level? One has to keep up and stay competitive and to even be able to relate to these technologies and actually create value. What do you say?
I agree with what you think, but yeah, of course. And I think if we as a firm or any other firm don't keep up with the development, then in the end, there would be some kind of role for the government to play, because we will all be out of work. And whether we need to, do something completely different or need to be retrained for do something else, that's when we're going to come in. I would think that what's the role of the government here? Obviously to support our educational system and prepare people when they go into the workforce. But otherwise, I would just think that it's up to the companies to stay relevant and creative and fund themselves. It's more for the people that fall out of the system. Of course, they need to look after. But I say it's up to the companies in Sweden to keep it relevant. And I can't think of any really big industries where you can not develop yourself.
No.
It's.
And I agree with you totally. I think the organizations have a very, very big role to play here, both to provide the opportunities for upskilling and reskilling. Could be training, could be offering packages saying, okay, you want to learn more about blockchain. Well, why don't you take these 5 courses or read these 5 memos, or helping people to learn? Because I also think it's important that we talk about the dark side of continuous learning, because it sounds so nice. I mean, continuous learning, and I do think it's important, and it's one of my key beliefs. I think it's super important, but there is also a dark side, especially when it's something that should be on top of what you're doing already. Or if you feel a lot of stress about not knowing enough or knowing the wrong things. And I think from what I've seen is that in some organizations, people feel a little bit lost, actually, because they want to learn, but they don't really know what to learn or how to learn it. Whereas in other organizations, it's much easier, because then the firm has said, okay, we can offer you this, or at least talk to that person, and he or she can help you find out how to go about to learn these new things. So I think the organizations can really be a great help for the individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think when it's like the toughest is probably when you have some kind of organization that suddenly something you do becomes totally obsolete. If you work in the financial industry somewhere, in an insurance company, and suddenly you don't need people to sit there and probably read all the new insurance contracts and also automated. And then maybe you have 40 people sitting somewhere that the work isn't done anymore. You can retrain them to do something else, or you have to let them go. And that's probably when some kind of, we need to pick them up, train them, because there probably won't be another insurance company that are going to need them for reading insurance contract and typing them, because no one's going to do that. So, yeah, so I mean, the technology stress is a reality for everyone. I mean, I think as an organization, you can't have the demand that everyone is on top of everything, but you need to have the relevant competence within the group that at least some people know. At least you can find, in total, you can find the competence you need in a group of people, but maybe not every individual needs to know everything, because it's kind of hard.
It's kind of hard, for sure.
Yeah. So it seems to me like this is critical to stay competitive and to even find a competitive advantage. Mattias, you mentioned cost efficiency, doing things better, but Frida, you mentioned creative destruction. So that's also about changing the rules of the game. So if we don't only use it, digitalization and the technologies to cut costs, then how do companies use it to stay innovative and rewrite the rules of the competitive game? For example, I think of the platform economy. What role is that playing in kind of breaking up the conventional industry structures and how firms operate?
That's a great question, I think, and we should really focus on the creative side, because that is what's going to help us, to move forward, I think. And I think there are lots of initiatives going on in different industries and also different organizations, both related to developing new types of services that we haven't thought about before. It could also be that talking about platforms, ecosystems, you take on a different role in your ecosystem. Perhaps you become like a sort of a broker or coordinator between different companies, helping your clients in that way, instead of having just a one-to-one relationship. So I think that is also something that's really interesting. And I wouldn't, I really want to stress, I think it's so important that you develop some type of communication channels or knowledge transfer between, both internally between different groups, but also externally with the other actors in your network, because that's really where the magic happens. At least what I've seen in the companies, that's where you find innovations. So I know, for example, that one of the largest law firms here in Sweden, they have this incubator now, which I think is one good example of this, right? So they have tech-based legal tech firms within the large incumbent firm and creating synergies and so on.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Mattias, but I know also like law firms and also KPMG Tax and other big four that we also sort of we create software that could help with the tax compliance or with, for instance, keeping track of your legal documents or compliance services. So we move around from just selling hours to actually have subscribed software revenue, which is great for a company like us, where you develop something and then you get payments every month without having to charge hours. Well, it's a new world. So and that's also something creative. I know law firms work with that, trying to find digitalize solutions, deliver it once, keep an eye on it, and then you start getting recurring revenue from it. So that's a lot of how you create more revenue, more value for the user, the client, and by being creative. So.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, it feels like we just got started, but it's about time to wrap up. But I really enjoyed the discussion. I certainly learned a lot. I like that kind of we touched both the theoretical and practical aspects, and really got into some of the recent developments, but also looked forward a bit to see where things are heading now. So thank you once again to the speakers, and thank you very much to you, Chen. And Anna for organizing this webinar. And just before we wrap up, I would like to give the word over to Anna Månsson, Alumni and Corporate Engagement Manager at SSE, and she will give you a quick update from the Alumni office.
Hey, thank you so much everybody who joined, and thank you Sebastian, thank you Frida, thank you Mattias for this very interesting and insightful webinar about the future of digitalization of expertise. I would like to take the opportunity to also promote our next upcoming alumni webinar, which is called The Gastronomic Future with COVID-19, where famed restaurateurs Håkan Svan and Johan Jureskog, accompanied by our own Christopher Laurel from SSE Institute of Research, will talk about how restaurants can thrive in the next normal, and they will discuss it from a New York versus Stockholm perspective. We'll send you guys out a link to this together with our evaluation survey for this webinar, which we would really appreciate if you'd take the time to fill out and offer any suggestions and tips you might have. But again, thank you so much for joining, and looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.